Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. This is where we grab some pretty serious source material, maybe put on our comfy clothes, metaphorically speaking, and just unpack reality, one fascinating little nugget at a time.
Yeah, comfy clothes definitely recommended for this one.
Absolutely. And before we really jump in, just a quick but, important note. This deep dive, like all our deep dives, is distributed completely free of charge. You can find it on all the major platforms, and it's purely for educational purposes.
Right, because we really believe that this kind of deep knowledge, this exploration, shouldn't have a price tag on it.
Exactly. So what are we diving into today?
Okay, so today we are going, well, deep into some foundational texts, really foundational for modern metaphysical thought, I'd say. We're analyzing session 33 of the early sessions, book 1 of the Seth material.
Session 33.
Okay, and this was pretty early on, recorded on a Monday evening, March 9th, 1964. Specifically noted as 9 p.m.
1964. Wow. Okay, so what's the mission for today? What are we trying to pull out of this session?
Well, it's pretty cool, actually. We're not just like summarizing the philosophy, although we'll touch on that. We're really trying to decode the personality, I guess you could say, of the intelligence communicating here, Seth.
Right. Who is this guy, essentially?
Exactly. And we're also going to look at the surprisingly human challenges that pop up. Things like working with inner data, psychic confidence, or the lack thereof.
Ah, yes, the confidence piece. That's always big. Huge.
And also why sometimes, the biggest block to getting this profound stuff isn't something external. It's that inner worry about looking. Well, Seth mentions Jane worried about looking flighty.
Huh. Yeah, the fear of being seen as flaky when you're dealing with, cosmic consciousness. I get that.
It's a real session, rich in, cosmology and ideas about transformation, but it's also incredibly personal. It's got these rapid-fire psychic diagnoses, which are kind of amazing, and it's often really funny.
Funny is good. Metaphysics can get a bit dry sometimes.
Totally. And we will be using direct quotes sometimes to illustrate things. I mean, nobody says it quite like Seth.
Right.
But we promise. We'll keep the vibe, conversational, relaxed.
Yeah, totally chill. I mean, look, when the entity you're channeling and, recording refers to you and your partner as my scalawags, dear pudding heads, and even salty peanuts.
Salty peanuts.
You kind of know this material is meant to be explored with a sense of humor, right? And a lot of honesty. So let's just dive right in. We start with this really unexpected intersection of consciousness and potential catastrophe.
Right. So session 33 kicks off with this massive, and I mean massive, literally house-shaking anecdote.
Yeah, this isn't just some abstract thought experiment. This is real life intruding.
Exactly. Joseph, that's Robert Bucks, who meticulously recorded all these sessions. He starts by asking Seth about this terrifying experience he had just a few days before. It was Friday, March 6, 1964, and he describes it as a very bad, windy day.
Okay, setting the scene. Bad weather.
Oh, yeah. Elemental clash is a good way to put it. Joseph's sitting in their living room in Elmira, where he often typed up the session notes. The weather's just ferocious, wind roaring, and his attention keeps getting pulled to this huge, dead elm tree limb.
Not just any limb, right? There's history here.
Precisely. It's on a neighbor's property, but it looms large right outside their windows.
Yeah.
And what makes it compelling, like you said, is this tree wasn't just background scenery. Joseph had a relationship with it. He'd actually drawn it several times.
Oh, interesting. So he knew its shape, its form.
Yeah, he mentions appreciating its powerful symmetrical shape. So he's not just passively observing the wind. He's watching it violently peel the bark back off these massive branches. It's intense.
And then comes the moment, right? The premonition.
Exactly. While he's watching this spectacle, he has this very specific, almost chilling mental calculation. He focuses on one particular massive branch that kind of arstled over their lawn.
Okay.
And he remembers thinking quite precisely that if this specific limb should fall, it would be long enough to strike the house.
Wow. That's not just a vague worry. That's specific geometry of disaster.
Totally. And what does he do? He dismisses it, turns his back to the window, back to the tree, and starts working on something else.
Classic human move. Couldn't happen.
Right. And then, bam! Validation arrives with shocking force. He describes a great roar, the whole house shaking with a violent thump, and the air filled with the sound of rigged wires.
The limb came down.
A massive limb had crashed down.
Yeah.
Exactly where he'd calculated it might hit.
Jeez. Did it actually hit the house?
Incredibly, no.
Yeah.
The specifics here are kind of key to understanding these near misses. Fortunately, the very tip of the limb just barely kissed the house, but sections, he says up to 25 feet long, were scattered all over the yard.
25 feet, that's huge.
Huge. And yeah, the TV cable was definitely ripped loose. So Joseph's question to Seth isn't just, wow, that was scary. It's about the mechanism. He asks basically, was I using my inner senses without consciously knowing it, or was that just a really, really intense case of confirmation bias? Just lucky guessing amplified by fear.
That's the million-dollar question for anyone who's had a weird premonition.
Absolutely. And Seth answers in his typical style. Cuts right through the noise after his opening greeting, "Good evening, my Scalawags,"
Yeah.
which just sets the tone perfectly.
Yeah, I love it.
He delivers this poetic but direct confirmation. He says, "The wind knows the tree feels the wind."
Okay, that's beautiful, but what does it mean in terms of Joseph's question?
Well, that phrase itself is kind of a mini lesson in interconnectedness, isn't it? It
Mm-hmm.
suggests the whole environment is like saturated with this pre-knowledge. It's not just in Joseph's head.
Right, the information is sort of ambient.
Exactly. And Seth explicitly confirms that yes, Joseph and Ruburt, that's Jane Roberts, the channel, were both aware that the tree would fall.
Both of them. Okay.
Both of them. And here's the kicker, the really crucial detail that makes this deep dive so valuable for understanding how this stuff works. Seth says the information, the inner data, wasn't received in that moment of watching the wind.
No. When then?
It was received much earlier. Specifically, Seth says, at noon that day, hours before the branch actually fell.
Noon. But they didn't act on it.
Nope. Seth states clearly both of them ignored it completely, didn't register consciously, or just dismissed it.
Wow. Okay, so the wind, the visual of the bark peeling, that wasn't the source of the knowing.
Exactly. That was just the external trigger. Seth says the hour senses the noise, the visual drama only re-stimulated the inner data. Data that had already been received was available, but got filtered out by their conscious attention, by doubt, by just being busy.
That distinction is huge. So it's like our inner GPS is always on broadcasting this high-fidelity info, but our conscious mind focused on, I don't know, typing or what's for dinner.
I said terrible receiver.
Yeah.
Or maybe willfully neglectful sometimes. Yeah.
So Joseph seeing the wind didn't create the feeling. It just jogged his memory of something he already knew on some level.
Precisely. Seth calls it giving Joseph a glimmer of what he already knew. It's the difference between perception and interpretation, maybe. The initial unease, that fleeting thought about the specific branch that was the inner data leaking through.
And the wind getting louder just gave the rational mind some external evidence to latch onto, making the inner knowing feel more plausible in that moment.
Exactly. It made it harder to ignore. So if we think about what this means for, you listening, it suggests that maybe coincidence is often just the dramatic external validation of an inner truth we chose to ignore earlier.
Right. How many times do we have that weird feeling, that little uncomfortable flash of awareness, and brush it off as just being silly or anxious or whatever?
Only to have reality basically screen the data back at us later with a falling tree limb or, something less dramatic, hopefully.
Hopefully. But yeah, it highlights how the conscious focus, especially when it's maybe too rational or just too cluttered, acts like this filter of doubt. We prioritize the tangible, the loud wind, over the subtle, constant flow of intuition.
And this anecdote perfectly sets up the whole need for confidence in this work, which we'll definitely get into later. But first, we kind of have to tackle the big question Joseph brings up next.
Okay.
Who or what exactly is Seth?
Right. So moving from, the very real physical danger of falling timber, we pivot to the more philosophical, the structure of consciousness itself. Joseph basically presses Seth on his identity. Who are you? And Seth, bless him, immediately starts tearing down the usual cliches.
Oh, absolutely. He is incredibly clear right off the bat. He rejects any terminology that he feels confines him or carries outdated human historical baggage. He states very firmly, and he says, this is strictly for the record.
Okay, getting serious now.
Nor am I any so-called spirit.
Whoa! Okay, let's pause on that. Spirit is probably the most common word people use for non-physical consciousness. Why reject it so strongly?
Well, Seth gives a couple of reasons. He says spirit is not only archaic and loaded down with superstitious meanings from, centuries of use.
Sure, yeah. Ghosts and seances and all that.
Right. But he goes further. He says using that term is absolutely detrimental to furthering knowledge of psychic phenomena.
Detrimental? How so?
Because if you use a word that's already so packed with religious history and rigid expectations, you basically shut down open, almost scientific inquiry. into the mechanism of how this communication works. It immediately locks the human mind into a specific, very restrictive framework.
Ah, I see. It prejudges the phenomenon before you even study it. It's like calling quantum physics magic. It stops you from asking how it actually functions.
Exactly. It's a call for new language, really, to accommodate a potentially new reality. And then, my absolute favorite line in maybe the whole session.
Uh-oh, here he comes.
He clarifies he's also not some kind of sci-fi caricature. He says he's not some weird sort of granddaddy longlegs of science fiction.
Huh. Granddaddy Longlegs of science fiction. That's brilliant. Where does he come up with this stuff?
I know, right?
Yeah.
It just instantly disarms the whole situation. It lets the listener and Jane and Joseph kind of relax and take in the information without that prejudgment filter that so often clicks on with this kind of communication. He establishes himself as, sophisticated, definitely humorous, and sort of contemporary, despite being non-physical.
Okay, so point taken. Not a spirit, not a sci-fi trope. So what is he then? What term does he want us to use?
He gives his preferred designation, and it's very functional, very precise. He says, I am a personality in essence energy form.
Personality, essence, energy form. Okay, break that down.
He follows it up by saying, to say I am energy is no lie. It's actually truer than many designations that would sound more authentic and complicated.
So fundamentally, he's energy, but with personality.
Right. That term essence energy is critical. Joseph tries to pin it down a bit more, asking if Seth is maybe like an emotional state.
That's an interesting idea, like pure emotion?
Seth kind of agrees, but only partially. He says, yeah, the emotional component is part of the personality essence, but he insists, and this is key, that he also has structure.
Structure. Okay, but how can pure energy have structure? That seems to be the sticking point for us physical beings.
It really is. Seth acknowledges this. He notes that his structure is actually simple, but it appears extremely complicated to us humans because, he says, we are fixated on word patterns rather than energy transferral complexes.
Whoa, okay. Energy transferal complexes, that's a mouthful. Unpack that jargon for us?
Yeah, it's dense, but think about how we think. We mostly use words, right? Linear logic. A leads to B leads to C. We build ideas piece by piece.
Sure.
An energy transferal complex, as I understand it, suggests a reality where information, structure, intent, they don't exist as separate building blocks. They exist as these dynamic, interconnected energy fields that can transfer or communicate structure and meaning instantaneously, or maybe holistically.
So less like building with Lego bricks and more like projecting a complete hologram.
That's a decent analogy, yeah. His identity isn't defined by a linear history or a physical form, but by this complex, unique, structured vibration of energy. His personality is the structure of that energy.
Okay. And communicating that complex structure into our reality, our word patterns, requires some effort on his part.
A lot of effort. He calls it a transformation. And he uses this really vast analogy about physical limitation to explain it. He says, imagine you needed to enter a very, very small physical space.
Okay, like crawling through a tiny hole.
Right. What would you do? You'd manipulate your body, right? You'd crawl, you'd hunch your shoulders, maybe turn sideways, suck in your gut. You'd adjust your physical form to fit the constraints of the space.
Makes sense.
Seth explains that the manipulations he has to perform to communicate through Jane into their small entryway, as he puts it, amount to a transformation that's way more profound than just hunching a shoulder. He says he is literally changing the alignment of his basic energy components. Condensing, maybe? Focusing. He says he can make himself smaller than the whole in a much more appreciable fundamental way than we can physically.
So he's restructuring his own energy essence to interface with our reality and Jane's consciousness.
Exactly. It's the act of condensing his presumably vast essence energy into a form that can interact with Ruburt's consciousness and, the physical reality of that session room in Elmira.
And he tries to ground this concept for them, right? Using physics analogies.
Yeah, he brings up the classic water steam analogy, reminds them that energy transformation, solid to liquid to gas, is fundamental to our reality. It's not magic, it's physics.
Right. We see it all the time.
And then he delivers the zinger, if I can be considered a spirit, then all energy must be a spirit. He's basically saying, if you label me spirit just because I'm non-physical energy, then logically, electricity is a spirit, heat is a spirit, light is a spirit. It makes the term meaningless.
That's a great point. It demystifies it by universalizing the principle. He exists electronically, sometimes chemically, he says.
Yeah, showing there's a potential scientific basis for his being, even if our current science isn't quite there yet to measure or understand it fully.
But he still insists on having structure, even if we can't see it with our eyes.
Absolutely. He argues that our conventional outer senses are actually the problem here. They don't show us reality directly. He says they provide only camouflage distortions of translated second-handed experience.
Whoa, camouflage distortions, second-handed experience. That's a pretty radical critique of our senses.
It really is. It suggests our senses aren't windows onto reality. They're more like translation software. They take raw energy data and translate it into familiar physical forms, tables, chairs, trees, which are useful for navigating this plane, but might be misleading about the underlying nature of things.
So the solidity of this table in front of me, the color of the sky, that's a translation. Created by my senses for my benefit.
According to Seth, pretty much. The inner senses, by contrast, he implies, offer a more direct, maybe less camouflaged view of the underlying energy reality.
Okay, that's a major philosophical hurdle to get over. If my eyes and ears are giving me second-handed info.
It throws a lot into question, doesn't it? And it leads him directly into this discussion about creation and manipulation. He points out that scientists, working primarily with this second-handed experience, know that all matter is ultimately composed of the same basic elements or energies.
Right, like EMCO. It's all interchangeable at some level.
But Seth says they don't know consciously how to change a river into a forest.
Which is like the ultimate alchemical dream, right? Transmutation, why can't they do it?
Because, Seth argues, they're approaching the problem from the outside inward. They study the external structure of the river, the forest, the elements, and they try to physically force change through external manipulation.
Like using chemicals or machines or whatever?
Exactly. Seth says the necessary manipulation, the real transformation, must be achieved from the inside out. It requires a conscious manipulation of the whole self or the whole environment, right down to that basic energy component level he was talking about.
So true change, whether it's personal growth or manipulating matter, has to start with an internal shift in consciousness and internal restructuring of energy first.
That seems to be the core implication. And it's kind of humbling, isn't it? This idea of manipulating energy structures to achieve total transformation stuff we consider the peak of far future science fiction. For Seth, it's just his basic operational mechanism. It's what he has to do just to talk to his pudding heads.
Yeah. He's showing us that maybe the most profound physics are actually metaphysics, or at least deeply intertwined. It's quite a mind bender.
Okay, so we've talked about Seth's nature, this essence energy structure. Now let's shift focus a bit from his structure to the structure of the communication itself, because this session makes it really clear that channeling isn't always some serene, blissful download. It was a very human element, very fragile sometimes.
Right, you mentioned Jane Roberts, or Ruburt, as Seth calls her, was having a tough time around this session.
Yeah, she was under considerable strain leading up to session 33. She apparently felt nervous, admitted she had not even a glimmer of what Seth was going to talk about that night.
Which must be unnerving, just opening yourself up to the unknown like that.
Totally. And Seth immediately picks up on this psychological tension. He addresses it directly, noting that the ego rears its head, in this case a rather attractive head, and the ego makes its protests.
The ego protest. Okay, what's the ego protesting against here?
Well, according to Seth, Rubert's primary fear was about becoming overly involved, losing control, basically. She didn't want to appear flighty or hysteric.
Ah, back to that fear of looking flaky.
Exactly. And Seth connects this fear directly to what he calls a personal distrust she had of the emotional and intuitive parts of her own personality. He even specifically hints it's tied to aspects of her background, particularly involving her mother.
Wow, so the very qualities that likely made her a good channel, that intuition, that emotional sensitivity, maybe that poetic flair she had, were the exact same qualities her conscious ego was fighting against. It's a classic conflict for many creative or intuitive people, isn't it? She was trying to impose this kind of rigid, logical control over a process that fundamentally requires intuitive surrender, a letting go.
She equated maybe strong emotion or deep intuition with a lack of discipline or being out of control.
It seems like it, based on Seth's comments, yeah. She feared being judged for those very qualities. And for the channeling to work smoothly, effectively, that conscious ego, the gatekeeper, has to agree to step aside, at least temporarily. But her ego, acting out of self-preservation and maybe fear of social judgment, was putting up resistance.
Which is completely understandable, but obviously problematic for the communication.
Extremely. And this is precisely why the presence of Joseph Robert Butts becomes so incredibly critical in this whole setup.
Right. Seth really emphasizes Joseph's role, doesn't he? He absolutely does. He stresses that Joseph's confidence, his quiet, unwavering acceptance and affirmation of the material as it came through. Seth calls it An indispensable plus in our whole relationship.
Indispensable. That's a strong word.
It really is. You cannot overstate this, based on Seth's own words here. He strongly implies that without Joseph's solid, pragmatic acceptance and quiet support, Ruburt probably wouldn't have been able to proceed in such a positive, consistent manner. She might have doubted herself too much or just shut the whole thing down eventually.
So Joseph wasn't just taking notes, he was like an anchor or a stabilizer.
Exactly. He created this safe space, this container of belief that allowed Jane to overcome her ego's fears. Seth actually refers to the dynamic between the three of them, Seth, Ruburt, and Joseph, as a powerful and sensitive gestalt.
Gestalt, meaning like a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Precisely. A holistic dynamic. The relationship itself becomes this functioning unit, and it's delicate. It depends on all the parts working together harmoniously.
So let me see if I get this. The channel, Ruburt Jane, has to give permission for Seth to communicate.
Right. Consciously or unconsciously, she opens the door.
But her willingness or ability to give that permission is directly influenced by Joseph's attitude. If she sensed deep down that Joseph was skeptical or disapproving or maybe just uncomfortable,
Her own permission would likely be withdrawn, maybe even subconsciously. Her ego's defenses would go right back up.
yeah.
Joseph's acceptance basically gave her ego permission to relax.
Wow, so it's this intricate system of checks and balances, all powered by emotional trust and confidence.
You nailed it. The stability of the whole gestalt is like Rubert's fragile confidence plus Joseph's solid faith, maybe multiplied by Seth's expertise in managing the energy. You take one component out or weaken it significantly, and the whole system could wobble or even collapse.
That's fascinating, and it ties directly into one of the most striking physical things that happened during this particular session, right? The voice changed.
Ah, yes. The deep voice. Joseph notes in his records that during session 33, Jane's voice began to grow noticeably deeper, more vibrant. He says it changed more dramatically than in almost any previous session up to that point, found it entirely unlike her normal speaking voice.
So naturally, Joseph probably assumed, aha, this is Seth's actual voice finally coming through.
That seems to be exactly what he thought. He asked Seth about it, but Seth clarifies, nope, not really. It's not his actual voice, whatever that might mean for an energy personality.
So what was it then?
Seth describes the deep voice as, and this is another great quote, one of my little tricks to add to his faltering and erratic confidence. He also calls it an approximation or a camouflage pattern created for their benefit, for their edification.
Wait, hold on. A trick. A camouflage pattern. If the voice is just like a performance, doesn't that kind of undermine the very confidence he says he's trying to build? Isn't that a bit manipulative?
That's a really fair question. It sounds dodgy, right? Like putting on a show. But Seth explains the utility, the necessity of the trick in that context.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't meant to deceive them about the source of the energy he still Seth. It was meant to reassure their conscious, doubting minds about the presence and otherness of that energy.
Ah, okay. So the conscious mind needs some kind of tangible, objective-seeming evidence to let go of its skepticism, even if that evidence is, well, constructed.
Pretty much. Remember Seth talking about our outer senses giving us second-handed experience? The deep voice is like providing a convincing piece of sensory data, auditory, in this case that helps override the ego's doubt. It's a powerful and apparently very low energy expenditure for Seth, way of saying, look, I am definitely here, and I am clearly not Jane speaking in her normal voice.
So it's like psychological staging, not meant to fool, but to facilitate belief in the process itself.
That's how I interpret it, yeah. It requires very little energy from Seth's side, he says, but it provides this massive cognitive reassurance, particularly for Joseph maybe, but also for Ruburt herself, that the channel has successfully been switched, that the connection is real and stable.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense. It's a tool for managing the human interface.
Exactly. And Seth uses this opportunity to define the trance mechanics more clearly, too. He says it's not the self-hypnosis that Jane and Joseph initially suspected it might be.
So what is it then?
Instead, he says, Ruburt switches on another channel, like tuning a radio, and then focuses her attention upon an objective inner stimulus.
Objective inner stimulus. That sounds like a contradiction, but I think I see what he means.
Right. It means treating that inner reality, that connection with Seth's essence energy, as objectively real, as solid and focus-worthy as, say, a physical object they might choose to focus on in the room.
That's a brilliant way to put it. We focus intently on outer stimuli all the time. A computer screen, the road when we're driving, the face of the person we're talking to. Trance, in this model, is simply redirecting that same power of focused attention inward onto an inner reality.
Precisely. And the deep voice, That's just one of the external side effects, or perhaps deliberate effects, that tells the rational, sometimes fearful ego, hey, it's okay, the shift is real, you can relax now. It greases the wheels of the whole delicate gestalt. All right, so we've covered Seth's nature, the communication gestalt, the confidence issues. Now, Seth transitions into something really practical, reviewing past instances of receiving inner data. It's like quality control, ensuring Jane and Joseph understand both the potential power and the potential pitfalls of psychic perception.
Right, making sure the instrument is calibrated, so to speak.
All
And
right.
this leads him to revisit that really heavy event, the Kennedy assassination.
Exactly. Which was still pretty recent history then, having happened in November '63, just a few months before this session. Jane had apparently received information related to the assassination before it happened.
Wow. How did it come through?
It came through 2 days earlier, November 20th, 1963, and it wasn't like a news bulletin, it was transformed into a poem.
A poem. Okay, that fits with Jane's creative nature.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Now, Seth confirms the core reception of the data was accurate. She definitely picked up on the impending event. But, he notes, a distortion occurred as the raw data passed through her conscious filter, her poetic sensibility, perhaps.
A distortion. What kind?
He says the data came through in a, quote, watered-down form, maybe less intense or specific than the raw input. And crucially, it was distorted in the very last lines by the addition of one specific inaccurate word.
Okay, what was the phrase and what was the word?
The final phrase of the poem, referring to the presumed assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, ended with the line, "Till he seeks death at his own hands."
At his own hands. Okay. And the distortion.
The word that caused the factual distortion was hand. Seth states that the symbolic truth of the poem remained intact. The idea that the assassin was maybe caught in forces beyond his control, also a victim in a way, and that his life would end violently and abruptly, all that was true.
Right. Oswald didn't live long after the assassination.
Exactly. But the specific factual detail was altered by that word hand. Oswald was, of course, shot and killed by Jack Ruby a couple of days later. He did not die by his own hand.
Ah, I see. So the core message, the symbolic weight, got through, but the literal fact got tweaked in translation.
Precisely. And this is such a critical lesson, isn't it? For anyone trying to work with their intuition or understand psychic information, it shows the fragility of pure fact when it gets translated through a creative, inherently symbolic human consciousness.
Yeah, it shows how our subconscious expectations, or maybe even just our desire for, like, poetic closure or a neat narrative arc,
Can subtly warp or color even profound inner truth. The subconscious might want things to fit a recognizable human pattern, like the idea of karmic justice. Maybe he seeks death at his own hands. Feels dramatically right, even if that pattern deviates slightly from the messy, literal facts of the situation.
So even if the core message is, say, 99% correct, that final 1% of specific detail can get colored by the filter of your own personality, your beliefs, your expectations. That's huge.
It really is. The subconscious likes tidiness, perhaps. It tries to make the incoming data fit, even if it has to bend to detail.
Okay, so that's a check on past accuracy, but then the session gets really practical and personal, doesn't it? Joseph brings up a physical ailment.
Yeah, poor Joseph. He'd apparently been suffering from a nagging toothache for several days. So he asks Seth about it. And this is where you see Seth's ability to use those inner senses, that direct perception, for really mundane, specific diagnosis. It's quite remarkable.
What does Seth say?
His diagnosis is instantaneous and incredibly specific. He says it's an irritated nerve. Okay, maybe predictable. But then he says it was pinched in a sudden movement.
A sudden movement, like whiplash or something.
That's what Joseph probably wondered. He asks Seth to specify the exact movement, maybe trying to figure out if he'd done something stupid or obvious. And Seth delivers this perfect, deadpan, almost comical detail. The movement was a yawn in sleep.
A yawn in his sleep. No way.
Ah, I know, right? I love that detail because it's so specific, so mundane, and yet so completely unlikely for Joseph to have figured out on his own. Who would ever assume their toothache came from yawning while asleep?
Nobody. That kind of hyper-specific, unexpected diagnosis, that's almost the signature of high-accuracy inner data, isn't it? It proves this intelligence is accessing details totally unavailable to Joseph's conscious memory or logical deduction.
Absolutely. It's validating precisely because it's so weirdly specific. And thankfully, Seth adds that it should right itself. It wasn't serious.
Good news for Joseph. But the advice doesn't stop there, right? Seth uses this opening to give some deeper personal guidance. particularly to Joseph.
Yeah, the focus shifts quickly from the tooth to Joseph's overall growth and well-being. Seth stresses that Joseph really must continue his walks and exercise his practical advice. But then he adds, he must avoid being too ingrown.
Too ingrown, meaning too isolated, too withdrawn.
Seems like it. And this isn't just standard self-help talk like get out more. Seth elevates it. He stresses that Joseph needs to start treating his contacts with the outside world, with other people, as challenges and even as pleasures. It sounds almost like an energetic command, not just a psychological suggestion.
Treat them as challenges and pleasures. Okay, why was this so important for Joseph?
Well, Seth actually ties this advice directly to a sensitive point, referencing Joseph's own father. He notes, somewhat pointedly, that Joseph's father's personality would likely have been less hampered, less restricted, had he allowed himself more outside contact, more engagement with the world.
Wow, bringing family history into it, that's getting personal.
Very. And this point about maybe emotional contagion or the risks of being too sensitive and withdrawn seems crucial. Seth warns that being overly ingrown can be energetically dangerous, potentially causing one to absorb or get stuck in others' negative emotional patterns, or perhaps just limiting one's own expression.
And getting this point across wasn't easy, was it?
No. Seth actually confirms that Ruburt, Jane, had been resisting letting him bring up this sensitive topic about the father for the past 3 sessions.
3 sessions. So the human filter was trying to veto advice it found potentially painful or uncomfortable.
Exactly, which just highlights that dynamic we talked about earlier. But the fact that she finally allowed this deep personal challenge to come through shows the increasing trust and strength within that 3-way gestalt. They were growing together.
That's a really positive sign. What else did they cover towards the end?
Well, Seth gives a quick progress report on some previous, more complex material. He confirms that the stuff they'd received about flying saucers, which likely related to his earlier discussions about energy transference and manipulating energy from one level or dimension to another.
Right, maybe non-physical craft or something.
Possibly. He says that material came through with flying colors, which must have been reassuring. It reinforces the validity of those trickier concepts about energy manipulation.
Okay. Any other practical bits?
Yeah, some advice on having witnesses present during sessions. He says their friend Philip was an excellent, stable witness. He cautions that generally one witness at a time is safest for maintaining the energy balance. But he does suggest that another friend, Bill McDonnell, who apparently had frequent experiences with apparitions himself, might be worth trying as a witness sometime.
Interesting. Gauging the energetic compatibility of observers. And then Joseph gets in one last question, right, about something completely different.
Yep. Joseph, ever the pragmatic, curious recorder, uses his final question to ask about the most, well, seemingly trivial detail. What's the weather like on Seth's plane of existence?
After all that deep philosophy and personal advice, he wants a weather report.
I know, but Seth doesn't miss a beat. He answers it directly. He confirms, no, he doesn't have rain or snow naturally occurring, like we do, driven by external atmospheric conditions.
Okay, so no weather systems.
But he adds, if he desires to experience rain or snow, he can create them instantly just by manipulating the molecular patterns around him. He just can't, as he puts it, blanket my plane with rain or snow. It's a personal, localized effect based on his intent.
Which is just the perfect little capstone detail for this whole deep dive, isn't it? It brings us right back to that core concept from earlier. His reality isn't one of reacting to chaotic external forces like weather.
It's one of conscious internal manipulation of fundamental energy structure. He is the master of his immediate domain, able to generate pretty much any effect he wishes. But those effects require his focused intent. They don't just happen to him.
Amazing. And did Joseph ask about the voice again?
He did, right at the end.
Yeah.
He asks if Seth is putting on that deep voice just for kicks, just playing around. And Seth's simple reply really seals the nature of their relationship. He just says, no, for your benefit and Ruburt's.
Wow. So the performance, the humor, the sometimes dense jargon, even the little tricks, it's all ultimately designed with their growth, their understanding, and especially their confidence in mind.
That's the takeaway. It's all part of the teaching, part of managing that delicate human connection. Hashtag AUTRO.
Man, session 33, it really is kind of a masterpiece, isn't it? Like a perfect little microcosm of the whole Seth material, packing so much in.
It really is. You get the big cosmic picture, this idea that the universe operates on structured, transformative essence energy, and the very clear statement that Seth is absolutely not a a spirit in the old sense.
And definitely not a granddaddy longlegs of science fiction.
Okay.
Can't forget that one.
Never forget the granddaddy long legs. But yeah, beyond the cosmology, we learned so much about the importance of the human factor, didn't we? That necessary gestalt, that three-way street created by Jane's permission and Joseph's unwavering confidence.
Yeah, that gestalt idea is huge. And the reminder that inner data, that intuition, it's apparently constant, but we so often ignore it, like Joseph with the falling timber.
Right. And even when it does surface, it can get subtly distorted by our own subconscious filters, our expectations. Like that one little word, hand, that shifted the literal truth of the Kennedy poem, even while preserving the symbolic meaning.
Such important lessons for anyone trying to navigate their own inner landscape. And of course, we just can't wrap up without acknowledging the personality shining through, right? That unique blend of profound cosmic insight delivered with this dry, almost mischievous humor.
That leads him to sign off the entire session with the utterly delightful, "And now good night, my pussy-footed tootsies."
Ah, pussy-footed tootsie. You just gotta love it. It keeps it grounded somehow.
It really does. Okay, so as a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to maybe carry forward and chew on, this comes from a note Jane apparently received after the formal session ended about Seth's own method of thinking or perception.
Ooh, bonus material.
Okay? Seth apparently described that when he processes people or interacts with consciousnesses, he doesn't usually confront them individually, like one person, then the next person, then the next.
How does he do it then?
He experiences them all together, simultaneously.
Mm.
Appreciating their individual personalities and emotions, yes, but experiencing them as a single holistic unit, like perceiving the entire room full, or maybe his entire plane of contacts, as one complex, interconnected whole.
Wow. Experiencing multiple individuals as one unit. Okay.
So the thought to ponder is this. If an advanced energy consciousness can perceive and process a whole group of individuals simultaneously as one integrated whole, what might that imply about the true underlying interconnectedness of our individual realities?
Right. If, on some level, you are being experienced not just as you, but as part of a larger collective unit, how isolated are you ever, really?
Exactly. Maybe that sense of separation is another one of those camouflage distortions of our outer senses. Just something to mull over.
Definitely something to mull over. Profound stuff.
As always with this material.
Right.
So listen, we really hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity. We strongly, strongly encourage you to study this material for yourself. Go directly to the source.
Absolutely. And we need to give proper credit here. All this comes from the Seth material, meticulously recorded by Jane Roberts and Robert F. Butts. The publisher is the New Awareness Network.
And if you want to dive into these early sessions specifically, like the one we discussed today, you can find the books and learn more by visiting the New Awareness Network website and their bookstore. The address is sethcenter.com/the-early-sessions.
That's sethcenter.com/the-early-sessions. Definitely check it out.
And just one final reminder. This deep dive, this whole exploration is provided free of charge on all the major platforms, purely for educational purposes.
We really appreciate you joining us today for exploring consciousness, reality, falling trees, and pussy-footed tootsies with us.
Been fun?
Yeah, it really has. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.